All right, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alexis Whitham. I'm the Director of Communications for the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and this is our June session of our education series. So this is happening the third Thursday of most months throughout 2022, and we're really happy that you joined us today. Thank you. I just want to start by going over some basic information about today's session. First, in order to be accessible, we have captions turned on for this event. So if you hit the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitle, you should be able to see live captions. If you have any issues with that, please just let us know in the chat and we can help you along. And welcome to our captioner today, Lydia. So thanks, Lydia, for captioning for us. Just so you know, our agenda for today, we're going to go ahead and have sort of a panel style discussion. But first, we'll have a little bit of data on transgender folks and homelessness and issues surrounding homelessness. So it'll be about 10 minutes of data, 45 minutes of panel, and then Q&A at the end. Your cameras and microphones will be off, everyone who's joined us today, because we are in a Q&A style session here on Zoom. So please do introduce yourselves in the chat, rename yourselves with your pronouns if you can. The chat's going to go the whole time, so have fun in there. And then, of course, you can use the Q&A function to go ahead and add questions that we will then address during the Q&A portion. And we may get to them sooner, depending on how the panel goes. Our plan is to have a pretty freewheeling conversation. It's not about presentations and having a set plan. It's really about answering the questions that are pertinent to our community and answering questions for everyone who's here with us today. We want to let you know that this session is being recorded. That is so we can make it accessible for those who couldn't join us. We'll be putting it on YouTube. So just wanted everyone to know that in terms of recording that expectation. And then finally, if you want to share on social media while you're doing this, I know a lot of us are living that multi-screen life. So if you like to tweet while you participate, please go ahead and use our CCH Ed Series hashtag. And then we have our handles for all of the organizations who are participating tonight. So thank you for the organizations that are participating with us. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into some data here to get us started to sort of set the stage for where we are. So we're going to talk about 5 things. We're doing quick data points. I want to mention that the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless does have an issue brief on LGBTQ identity and homelessness. But as we were coming into Pride Month, we were, we know that Pride Month happens every year, and we're very pleased that it does. But we also know that there are people within the LGBTQ community that are disproportionately impacted by a lot of issues, particularly homelessness. So that's why we decided to have this session dedicated to trans and non-binary issues. And so that's what we're going to concentrate on today. Some of our data is going to be a little bit about LGBTQ folks, but we tried to get some new data specific to the trans experience to make sure that we're really honing in on the folks who need to be elevated in conversation. So we're going to talk about poverty, wages, and food security, which we all know, those of us who work in homelessness, are sort of the beginning things that happen prior to homelessness and during homelessness, of course. Then we'll talk about homelessness statistics, youth impact, some additional data about race and gender, which we always know that intersectionality of identity is very important, and then discrimination and barriers to access. So don't worry, it's only about 10 minutes of data for those of you who aren't the data nerds. So our first stat that I think is just really just so much to take in is that transgender people were almost 2.5 times more likely than cisgender people to face food insufficiency during the pandemic. We had data, we know that the main part of the pandemic, not that it's over, we saw a lot of issues that already existed get exacerbated, and that one about food insecurity is really key. We know that 29% of transgender adults live at or below the federal poverty line. And we know that cisgender people take home 32% higher wages than their transgender colleagues in the workplace. Transgender people also report feeling far less supported in the workplace than their cisgender colleagues. So we're getting that double experience of folks making less money and then also having worse experiences at work. 20% of trans adults experience food insecurity, while only 8% of cisgender adults did. And of course, this is more stark if you compare transgender people of color and white cisgender people. This is a good point to note that we will send this out in our follow-up email tomorrow, along with the link to this on YouTube. So don't worry about taking these down. Don't worry about the references at the bottom. You'll get it all tomorrow. Next slide, please. So homelessness. 1 in 5 transgender individuals have experienced homelessness at some point in their lives. That's a big one. 8% of transgender adults experience homelessness in the past year. So that it's a current lived experience for a lot of folks that we're interacting with. According to the 2020 point in time count, the number of adult transgender individuals experiencing homelessness increased 88% since 2016, and the number experiencing unsheltered homelessness increased 113% during the same period. For those who aren't familiar, unsheltered homelessness is, camping, having tents, living on the street without cover. It's not going to a shelter. And so shelters are not always the safest place for people of trans experience. 70% of those who stayed in a shelter in the past year reported some sort of mistreatment because of being transgender. And more than half of those who stayed at a shelter in the past year were verbally harassed, physically attacked, and or sexually assaulted because of being transgender. Nearly 1 in 10 of respondents to one survey were thrown out once the shelter staff found out that they were transgender, and 44% decided to leave the shelter because of poor treatment or unsafe conditions. 1/4 decided to dress or present as the wrong gender in order to feel safe in a shelter, and 14% said that the shelter staff forced them to dress or present as the wrong gender in order to stay at the shelter. I'll mention now that this is a national survey, so our partners that we're talking to today and those of us who work in homelessness here, we hope that those numbers are better in Colorado, but I don't have those numbers in Colorado specifically. So all I can give you is the national data, and that this is not something that is specific to one place. And the reason that I want to talk about that unsheltered versus sheltered thing is that living on the streets and being forced, it often means being forced to engage in risky survival behaviors, and it elevates your risk of violence and victimization under an already extraordinarily vulnerable group. So that problem with what we're having at shelters means that unsheltered people are more unsafe. You're disproportionately more unsafe when you're unsheltered, and that's something that trans people are experiencing due to discrimination. So you'll see that 63% of trans individuals are unsheltered, and people experiencing homelessness who are cisgender, that's only 49%. So we want to talk a little bit about youth. This first slide here, it's about all LGBTQ youth. Part of that is that's where our data is better, and part of the reason we want to do that is that nearly 1 in 5 people who identify as transgender are ages 13 to 17. The number of people who identify as transgender has nearly doubled in recent years, and around 1.4% of 13 to 17-year-olds and 1.3% of 18 to 24-year-olds were transgender, compared with 0.5% adults. So starting with youth, just generally LGBTQ, is already telling us more about trans folks than other demographics. So LGBTQ youth have 120% higher risk of becoming homeless than non-LGBTQ youth, with up to 40% of the youth experiencing homelessness identifying as LGBTQ+. They are at high risk for family rejection, physical assaults, and sexual exploitation in shelters and on the streets. And they're more likely to experience those things while being homeless. And then, of course, BIPOC youth have an 83% higher risk of experiencing homelessness compared to their non-BIPOC counterparts, with BIPOC LGBTQ+ youth at even higher risk of homelessness. Next slide, Ryan. And this youth chart from True Colors United is interesting. You'll see the LGBTQ and then you'll see the transgender numbers. And interestingly, family conflict is the most common cause of all youth homelessness. For LGBTQ youth, the conflict tends to be over their sexual orientation or gender identity. But as you can tell by this graph, top factors for homelessness for LGBTQ youth include for all of the youth who are here, the 5 categories that you see are forced out, ran away, family issues, aged out of foster care, abuse at home, and family poverty. But if you look at just the transgender youth, you'll see those higher numbers. For forced out, family issues, and aged out of foster care. So we do see differences, but once again, we just don't have amazing data on youth and transgender folks. So if you could, thanks, Ryan. So we have additional data on race and gender. We just want to touch upon some data points that are relevant. Also, this is our first time with like a little video picture, so it's throwing me off, but we thought we'd try it. 2 years into Zoom, gotta try new things. So what we're looking at here is that intersectionality of race and gender along with being trans. So trans men earn 70% on the dollar for every dollar the typical worker earns. Terrible statistic, worse than women at large, right? But the number is 60% for trans women. So those issues that we see based on gender, we see once again for trans folks, the differences that trans men and trans women experience. Male to female transgender workers can see their earnings drop by nearly a third after their transition. So just direct correlation. And then Black and Latinx transgender adults are more likely to live in poverty than transgender people of any other race. We also have statistics about Black trans women and jail. So in a sample study of people experiencing homelessness who were incarcerated in 8 Colorado jails, nearly half of those who were not homeless in the past 30 days reported they expected to be homeless upon leaving the jail, or they did not know if they would be homeless. So that was specifically about Black trans women. And, you know, we know that when folks are, once they're in the jail pipeline, it just gets worse and worse and exacerbated. So that, you know, those factors, combined factors of being a woman, being Black and being trans, we know that Black trans women just have the worst statistics in our community. And it's very important to highlight that in the data and to highlight that in these conversations. And then finally, we wanted to just like talk about discrimination. Obviously, we've talked about that, how it relates to, you know, going to a shelter, things like that. But it happens overtly, and it also, fear of discrimination also keeps trans people from seeking necessary services. So we know that it happens overtly. More than 1 in 10 transgender people have been evicted from their homes because of their gender identity. But then we also see the things that happen that people don't register for their SNAP benefits as often as they should. It's really underutilized, but that number is higher with trans folks, that only 29% of transgender adults who met the income requirement were enrolled, while 39% of cisgender adults were. And you know, folks just don't want to be discriminated against and often don't want to put themselves in situations for that to happen. And so just double checking something. Yeah, so the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has issued guidance stating that discrimination against transgender renters or home buyers based on gender identity or gender stereotypes constitutes sex discrimination and is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act. But unfortunately, general lack of awareness has contributed to discrimination, eviction, and homelessness of trans people in the U.S. So that's another way in which discrimination is happening, and sort of a lack of knowledge and a lack of concentration of like, how do we elevate, how do we concentrate on, how do we really proactively try to solve these things, because we know that sometimes a policy change isn't going to be enough when people are incredibly marginalized. So next slide, Ryan. Thank you. I would also like to thank Ryan and Shannon, my colleagues, for helping on this session, and the whole team here at CCH. So thank you. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists that are here today. We have a really wonderful array of folks who work in the sector here in Colorado and have a variety of experience and knowledge. And so I'll go ahead and read a little short bio on everyone, and then we'll ask them to unmute and join. I'm not sure if Ashley has joined yet, but if she is, if she's running late, then we'll just fly without her. So first, I'd like to introduce Marvyn Allen, whose pronouns are they, them. They're the Health Equity and Training Director at One Colorado. Their passion is to serve the community. Their passion to serve the community began while growing up and studying in Illinois, where they earned a bachelor's in social work, a master's in public administration, and a graduate certificate in women's studies. Since moving to Colorado in 2010, they have served on the board of directors and facilitated genderqueer support groups for the Gender Identity Center of Colorado, as a volunteer commissioner of Denver's LGBTQ Commission, and as an advocate for LGBTQ youth in out-of-home care. Most recently as the director of Give Denver at Denver Human Services, Marv worked to support individuals and families in meeting their basic needs through community donations, resources, and referrals. In 2017, they co-founded the Transformative Freedom Fund with a mission to remove financial barriers to transition-related healthcare for transgender and gender nonconforming Coloradans. So welcome, Marv, or Marvin, which do you prefer? Either one. Okay, you're muted, but that was like a very clear either one. So awesome. Okay, Nicole Schmidt, they has worked at Urban Peak alongside young people experiencing homelessness for 7 years. They have provided street outreach, case management, and program supervision with young people on the streets, in shelter, and in housing programs. They've also worked in adult shelter and school settings around Denver. Nicole currently oversees facilitating and coordinating training for Urban Peak staff. They are currently completing their master's in social work, focusing their studies on intersections of homelessness and LGBTQ+ youth. Welcome, Nicole. All right.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. And Shannon, do we have Ashley? Or Ryan, either one?
I think that we are trying to contact her right now.
Okay, great. Thank you for working on that. I will go ahead and save her intro for when and if she joins. And, you know, it's a freewheeling conversation, so we'll just get going without her and hope to see her join us soon. So welcome, Nicole and Marv. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who's here and joining us. And watching us. We're really excited about this session. I wanted to start with sort of, you know, we just heard a lot of statistics. They were rapid fire, but, you know, as people who work in the sector, I guess, what's data that you found surprising, or what's data that is missing? Like, what are you like, okay, that's great, but we don't have enough information on X, Y, or Z. And who'd ever like to start?
We're like unmuting at the same time.
Yeah.
No, I think y'all did a great job like covering the whole spectrum of data around that. I think just really highlighting like the intersectionality of it all. I think I am obviously most familiar with like the youth specific data. But one thing that I find really fascinating is always that like if you look at Black youth and if you look at white queer youth, they have about the same rate of homelessness, which is like 6-7%. And when you look at youth who are Black and queer, it like literally doubles to 14%. And so, yeah, and y'all touched on that for sure, but just like the intersectionality piece, I think is like one of the most important aspects of this. Yeah, as well as like, I think the experiences that folks have while they're on the streets. I think there's a lot of data out there to support that trans youth and queer youth in general like are homeless for longer periods of time and face more adversity on the streets in terms of like self-harm, physical harm, discrimination, like needing to exchange sex for basic needs. And then like, I think there's a statistic out there that have like double the early death rate of folks who aren't queer. So it just sort of like longer experiences of homelessness, more intense experiences of homelessness. So I think a lot can be said for like both the resiliency and strength of that community, as well as like, just like the extreme amount of like vulnerability and risk that's present for these folks.
Thank you. That was fascinating. And those are definitely things that I didn't find when I was researching data. And so that's really, really good to know. And any additional information that you have is super appreciated. Marv?
Yeah, I agree with both of y'all on the compliments for the information, because there's not a whole lot that I can add, so I'll just kind of speak to it a little bit, because y'all are so right about you know, these shocking numbers, which as many times as I hear them, they're still shocking, they still resonate, and especially when we're talking about the intersectionality of folks' identities and how they experience homelessness and discrimination and all kinds of things that lead to homelessness. And I was thinking about that part of the question on like, what is missing here? We're missing a lot of data still. Y'all collected what there was. Y'all got everything there was, basically. So great, everything I've ever seen and more. So I took a picture of the SNAP data too, because I'm like sending it to staff. Here's some SNAP data for us. So thank you for that. So yeah, you all collected it, and that's the gist of it. And so we still struggle to have numbers about our communities so that folks, living in, I just moved to Pueblo County last week. And so folks living in, for example, Pueblo County, Colorado, understanding that, yeah, there are trans and non-binary folks in your community, and not just in your community, but accessing your services and coming to you for help. And what happens when they're not affirmed and when they're not treated with respect, they're less likely to come back. And we saw that in the SNAP data. They're less likely to trust the system, where they might feel humiliated or discriminated against, and yet they're sitting there. For folks who have ever applied for SNAP, it's not a quick process. You're there for a while, sometimes all day, sometimes 2 days in a row, just to get your SNAP benefits. So, and another thing came to my mind too, is the power, as much as I am on Colorado, just going after that data, that quantitative data, the power of some of these stories as well. There's some just inhumane treatment that happens. And my belief is, as a social worker, and this is kind of my stance, or I guess my perspective, most of the time with folks, is that people do want to do better. And so I believe that folks working in shelters want to do better. They want to give shelter to everyone. They want to give safety to everyone, but their actions don't always show it. The tools that they have don't always help them show it. And so the system is not only failing with folks accessing those services, but those folks giving those services. And so like hearing some of those, stories of folks, and even when we talk about the data about sexual assault, one sexual assault in our lifetime is life-changing, let alone the amount of sexual assault and abuse that trans, and especially trans feminine folks of color, experience. So yeah, so I think I just had comments on it more than any additional data to share, because y'all covered it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. And you mentioned that you're with One Colorado, so I wanted to give the opportunity, we sort of jumped right in, but tell us a little bit about the organizations you both work with, and sort of why, you're experts on this and within the field, and for folks who, may not be familiar with your organizations or your work.
I'll go first this time, Nicole. So I'm so glad you asked that, because yeah, we did jump in and I love doing my spiel. One Colorado is the state's leading advocacy organization for LGBTQ Coloradans and our families. So we do that, our advocacy, through a lot of ways. One of our main ways we do it is through state level policy. And so passing pro-equality pieces of legislation. So speaking of hard to get data, one of the pieces of legislation, and this wasn't one of our bills, out Boulder, Colorado worked on this bill with Representative Tatone, but I'm super excited about it, so I'm going to talk about it. It requires CDPHE to start collecting sexual orientation and gender identity data. And that's been a push we've been doing for a while, especially around COVID rates, COVID vaccines, things like that. We know from our data from Closing the Gap, and I have the link up, so when I pause, I'll drop it in, from our latest report, Closing the Gap, that LGBTQ Coloradans who have an affirming provider are more likely to get a flu shot, are more likely to go to their doctor for their annual checkup, are more likely, to go to a dentist. Like it's all this thing, get STI screenings, all of these preventative care, not just for ourselves, but for our community, is more likely if we're going someplace where we're affirmed. And we don't have the data on it, but my guess is COVID vaccines as well. I don't see why that would be that much different. And so so we do a lot of that data collection. Really excited for that bill to pass. We also passed a bill to fund $900,000 for nonprofits and grant money to develop cultural competent healthcare trainings, not just around LGBTQ care, but also around veteran status, language, race, and ethnicity. And there's like 3 or 4 primary areas listed in the policy that I'm forgetting. I call myself policy adjacent. So I just talk a little bit about it. And then I bring Meredith in to talk about the meat of it. We also do work to elect pro-equality candidates so that we can pass the pro-equality legislation. And so our Pink Party, I'm gonna hype our Pink Party the Saturday of Pride, June 25th at Trax. It's a fundraiser for our 501c4 arm of our organization that promotes pro-equality candidates to be elected for office. And so we get to do a lot of that and organizing. We do safe schools work. So we work with GSAs around the state, helping to build them, provide them with trainings, provide them with resources, as well as training teachers and administrators. And then in my world, we do a lot of health equity. So this kind of thing, talking about closing the gap that I'll drop in just a second around healthcare. And then more and more, we're doing work to look at social determinants of health. We're working now on food access in Pueblo County. And really bringing an affirming lens to that. Like people need to be affirmed in everything. We need to be affirmed in our sexual orientation, in our gender identity, in our need, in our ability to give, in our race, in our language. We need to be affirmed. And so I'm really excited to do that work, and hopefully it'll have an impact on the people in this community. So that's us in a nutshell.
Marv, you do such cool work. That's so amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. I feel like sort of the opposite, like polar opposite world a little bit. I work for Urban Peak in Denver, and so we just provide like basic direct care services to folks who are living on the streets in the Denver metro area. I worked as a street outreach worker for like many, many years. That was kind of like where I sort of how I grew up in this work. And yeah, literally like going into camps and libraries and parks and bus stops and just like introducing ourselves to folks and like, do you need like a water bottle or a granola bar, or condoms, or like socks, or like what, like, and how can we just like build a relationship and meet people where they're at and fully just like enter into that, like drop into that space with people, which is like so powerful and so amazing. And at Urban Peak as a whole, we provide like street outreach, day center, overnight shelter, 3 different housing programs, community housing, education and employment services, social emotional support, mental health support, kind of the whole range. And I'm in sort of like a management role overseeing training for staff right now. But that's, so I think specifically where that obviously intersects with folks who are trans is like that is like becoming an increasingly larger percentage of our population that we serve. I think if the Colorado, I think national statistics is like whatever, it's hard to get data, but like 0.56% of people identify as gender expansive. And at Urban Peak, we have about 7% of our clients identifying that way. So when we're about 12 times higher of representation of trans and gender expansive folks within our programming, than the community as a whole, that is like a really big issue. It's a big concentration of folks who end up accessing our services and need extra support. So yeah, that's kind of that's my world.
Thank you so much. And this is like an ideal panel for us. That's what we like to do is see, there's going to be different perspectives, and you can get that big picture statewide advocacy perspective and also the on the ground, this is who I talked to yesterday perspective. And I think it's important to have all of that. I would like to point out we had a 4th panelist plan who was a person of lived experience, and they weren't able to make it. He had a scheduling conflict and wasn't able to join, but that is a voice that we wish was here. And when as many voices as we can get elevated in these types of programs is our preference, but I'm really happy to have both of you. And I will say these 2 organizations are really great. If you are interested in helping or what you can do, the advocacy you can do with One Colorado, and also CCH does advocacy as well. And then, Urban Peak, I've personally gone and done where you sign up and you serve a meal. There's so many great opportunities to get involved. So, I haven't been caught up in the chat, but if you're like, hey, what can I do? If you don't work in the sector necessarily and you just want to volunteer, like I definitely recommend looking into both of the orgs that we have here today, and just keeping in mind that there's always a way to go ahead and make an impact through wonderful grassroots organizations here in Colorado. So I want to jump to a question about healthcare. As you all probably know, CCH's big motto is healthcare is housing, housing is healthcare. We see those as very integrated. And I know, Marv, in your bio, you did some work on this specifically in terms of gender affirming care, just as like, you know, sort of a side gig with your 7 other things you're doing, it sounds like. But for people who are trans or gender non-binary, you know, receiving healthcare and housing can be a question of safety, not just access and affordability. What do you suggest providers to do to better serve trans and gender non-binary clients who may be on this chat, or just generally, like, tell us a little bit about your experience in the intersection of health, housing, and trans identity and non-binary identity?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that question. And I will share, I wouldn't have volunteered like as a person of experience to speak on the panel because it's been a long time since I've had experiences with homelessness. That was as a small child with my family, with my mom. And so I don't have those experiences, even navigating those systems, or even that many memories from it, to be honest with you, because I was so young. But I am a person with trans and non-binary experience. And so, man, these intersections, I could talk in a wheel for, you know what I mean? Like we could go around and around, all of us could go around and around with this, because the intersections are so intertwined. So, oh gosh, where do I start? I'm gonna start with the story. I'm gonna give the good news first, and then the heartbreaking side that came before that. I've been working with someone, and she will be sharing her story soon, because she has just been waiting to heal from the facial feminization surgery that she just accessed through Colorado Medicaid. And I've been working with her a while. And really, I say working, I've just been talking with her for a while and getting her ready to make those moves so that she could get a denial. That was the goal. Let's get your denial. Let's celebrate that denial, because that means we have something to move forward with. We have something to appeal. Otherwise, we're just sitting there wishing we could do something. I just told this story earlier today on another call, and it does make me really emotional. I'm so happy for her. She just had facial feminization surgery. I FaceTimed with her the other day. So the ending is really, really happy. But one day I was talking with her, and I think I mentioned I'm a social worker, or my bio did. So I went into social worker mode. She told me that she had lost the housing that she was in, and she was living with someone who has been abusive to her in the past and abuses her now, and she had no other options. It was that or the street, or probably a worse place to go. And I'm like, oh, well, a job would fix this, right? So what kind of work do you want to do? I'll help you. You know, it's not really part of my job, but I love doing this. Like, let me help you find a job you want to apply for it. You know, and she just stopped me and said, Marv, I would have to take the bus. I'm not safe. I can't go to work. This is the safest place for me. And I had to realize that I had no idea what her life was like, no idea where she was coming from, and she is the expert on where is the safest place for her. Now that she has had feminization surgery, facial feminization surgery, her next steps are those things, like getting a job that she enjoys and that she's affirmed in, and finding stability in that, and finding stable housing. Those are her next steps now. Before, she wasn't safe to go out. I mean, we know every year for Trans Day of Remembrance, we, you know, read off the names and talk about and remember the folks that we've lost since the last November 20th. And every year, almost every single one of those names are trans women of color. And I mean, that's a fact that we can't deny. And so that was her situation. And so that's one example of how they coincide. How can you go out there and move on to the next thing when you're scared of walking out of your house for really good reason? Even though you're being abused in your home, you probably won't get murdered, but you could get murdered outside your home. So it gets really personal for folks and really scary for folks. Another story I'll share is when I founded with Anaya Robinson and Rachel Kesley, when we founded Transformative Freedom Fund, In 2017, we held our first fundraiser, and we had never funded anyone because we didn't have any money. So Anaya and I were sharing our stories of transition. In 2018, we had our first fundraiser where fund recipients came and were invited, and only one of them had agreed to speak prior to the event. But after that person spoke, we had like 3 of the fund recipients who were there that was like rushing to us, like, oh, I want to speak too. I want to speak too. So our MC is getting all kinds of notes together, and so that she can announce them. And then she announces the last one, and she says her name, and she says a few things about her. And she says, "and future business owner." And I'm like, that's exactly why we do this. That's why I needed my transition to happen. That's why I needed gender affirming surgery. That was literally the only thing I could think about. Literally the only thing I could think about. I felt uncomfortable. I felt ashamed. I was read all the time. I wasn't safe. I wasn't, I couldn't focus on my work. And so it's very much intertwined. And I didn't even talk about like discrimination that we experience, on our jobs as well. So.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Marv. Nicole, do you have any, you're out there talking to folks about healthcare, or just personal experiences that you've had talking to folks?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I think something that Marv started bringing up too, which is like the cyclical nature of it and how these all intertwine and flow with each other. And I think I've sort of have seen sort of the flip side of that same coin, where people feel like so many clients that I can think of it's been years since I worked in direct service, but yeah, like clients who are trans and don't have the resources and ability to access even basic like razors, clothing, makeup, like hair care, like things that they want to be able to express their identity, to be able to like really be in congruence with their full self, and like don't have access to those very basic things because of their homelessness. And so sort of like the flip side of that same coin being like, I've seen a lot of folks that as soon as they get housing are able to like get on hormones or get surgery, like are able to like express the way they identify. And that is like such a huge barrier that people face, is folks just like not having the ability to express themselves the way that they want. And one thing I was thinking about too, I think going back to the very original question, is how do we do better? Like sort of what are the ways that we can as providers show up in that space? And I will say that I think like my own journey with this, just to like get personal for a second, like when I entered into this space in like homeless services, identified as like a cisgender straight woman, and then have like, actually, I'm very queer and identify as gender expansive. And so sort of like my identification with the population I'm serving has really shifted over time. But part of this is like, who are we hiring? How are we asking the right questions of the people we're hiring? When I was at a hiring manager role, it became really important to me to learn, like, I need to ask, like, what is your experience working with trans clients? And this is an organization that serves all youth experiencing homelessness. So there's a lot of hiring managers that is not like their highest priority. It's like, what is your experience working with unhoused folks or working with youth? But learning how to really prioritize, like, how are we serving this specific population? And are we asking these questions in interviews? Because then like we end up hiring someone with great experience with youth who like is incredibly transphobic and actually doesn't have a deep-seated belief that like these folks should be celebrated. And so it's like, really, like, as soon as I started moving into sort of like management positions in these organizations, it's like, these are ways that we serve our clients better, is like starting with staff who like fully like are on board with like celebrating everybody's identity. And I know that it's much easier said than done because there's a lot of like hiring shortages. So it's also like, we're literally just trying to staff our shelter, and now we're raising the bar really high of like, which is actually kind of a low bar. It's like, how do we like bring in the right people to be working with our clients so that like, even when they don't have access to like razors or clothing that is like aligned with their gender, that they feel that staff are like respecting their pronouns, respecting their identity, and like treating them as their gender identity fully is. because there are so many days when folks come in and like cannot present the way they want to present. And so that starts with having staff who are still able to like step into that space and be like celebratory of who these people are. So that's just like a thought that I have on that, I guess.
Thanks for sharing that, Nicole. I think sometimes people don't want to share when they have shortcomings or when those competencies aren't fully there for their organizations. We recently had a data presentation at CCH where our data team was talking about how we don't always get the best answers for folks who are non-binary or transgender for our questionnaires. And so they're like, we want to really have a concerted effort to look into why there's a disproportionately lower response rate on some survey questions. And, you have to acknowledge where you're not you're not meeting the goals, because that's the only way to solve it. So thank you for sharing that that's the experience you've had. And, I think you need to be proactive with this level of discrimination. I'll point out that the Colorado Coalition for the Homelessness Stout Street Health Center does have gender affirming care. And for anyone who, visits us, we do try to serve all communities, including the trans community. So just to put that out there, we don't have anyone from the health center here with us today, but I do want to mention that. I'll also mention that Ashley Browning, the operations manager for the Center on Colfax, let me know she's not able to join us. They had a security issue at the center, and so things happen, and so she's not able to join. But Center on Colfax is amazing, and please go to Pride next weekend and always support the center. So I want to jump in a little bit more. Marv, you really talked a lot about trans women of color and their disproportionate impacts that they have with discrimination in the community and how that goes. So, does anyone have thoughts on how organizations and individuals can sort of work to combat the transphobia, the racism, and the sexism that kind of all come together to really impact trans women of color?
That's a big one. I am going to take a second, but I'm happy to jump in first, Nicole.
Yeah. I have a couple, if you want a second to think, I have a couple thoughts that I could share, which is, first of all, that because we're talking here about like, these are like big isms and systems that are just deeply ingrained, right? So there's the cynic in me that's like, I don't know that there's actually a lot that as individuals and organizations we can do other than like the active work of like self-awareness and being better agencies, hiring the people who are on board for this and like training the staff that we have as best as we possibly can, and then like advocating like hell for the clients that we have who are especially Black trans women, because as much as we know is like these systems will constantly work to discriminate against these folks, and these systems are hard to navigate as an outreach worker. Like the process to get an ID, as like, I mean, I'm sure many of you who are like attending this like maybe have experience working with this, but like if someone is unhoused and they are a young person, there's a large chance they've never had an ID in their lives. So then like getting someone an ID without a parent or guardian is ridiculously hard in and of itself. And then getting an ID and then doing a name change and gender marker change on those documents when you finally have them is like these systems are ridiculously hard, right? And so I was really lucky to play a role in an outreach position where I got to journey with people. Like, let me literally take you to the Gender Identity Center, or literally take you to the DMV and sit with you for 3 hours while we wait. That is pretty rare that organizations have that capacity to let their staff journey with people in that way. And so I think what that means is like, how do we create organizational space and capacity so that as outreach workers or as case managers, we can like journey with people to that level, because these systems are discriminatory against specifically like Black trans people. And so if we can create capacity for our staff to help people navigate those systems, there will be more people who can exit homelessness, simply because they then have access to like someone going with them to their doctor's appointments or going with them to the DMV, and like those really basic things is where like I was able to find, at least as a case manager, like the most success in helping like that specific population of people. And I'm just going to name it, in an ideal world, there would be like we like share and give power back to those clients, and we don't need to be the advocates, right? Like that would be the ideal. But like when you are in the DMV facing like a 3-hour wait to get an ID, like that is like having someone in your corner, and specifically like as a white person, like to be sitting there and being like, yeah, I have like, you know, I have my master's degree, I have whatever, and I can like sit here and help you learn how to navigate these systems because I have systemic privilege, and like let me sit there with you and be there with you to like at least make this one less barrier that you have to face. And like in my personal work and in this field, it's like that is where I'm like finding moments of hope, is like helping people get through the system so that they then can go like live their lives. And like no one should have to be like stuck in this like homelessness cycle and they're not able to like get their basic needs so that they can exit homelessness, right? So that is my like very initial small thought, as well as I guess the only other thing I'll add is like there's a lot of introspective work here that if you're willing to engage in it and dialogue in it, both on a personal level and an organizational level, is like really, really, really hard, sticky work. And that for us, I mean, sometimes it looks like we're having conversations about like, okay, are we restricting people or evicting people disproportionately who are people of color and are trans people of color, and why is that happening? And doing like the gross work of dissecting through your own organizational data of like, why are we not housing like as many Black people and as many Black trans people and as many trans people in general? And how do we change the way that we're housing people to like change that? Like, I know that within our continuum of care in the Denver metro area, One Home has been leading conversations about that and about the coordinated entry process to like really think through critically the way that we are choosing who gets housed, which I think is amazing. But there's ways to do that internally as well, in terms of like who are we restricting or evicting, and like, is this disproportionate? And then how do we change that? And those conversations are really hard to have, and like probably one of the most important things we can do on an organizational level, I think. And that's speaking from like a 501c3 perspective where we don't have an advocacy arm, right? So I can't be like, as an organization, we're out there advocating for this and this and this. Like that's sort of outside of our scope of work, unfortunately, at Urban Peak, but I'm sure that there's a lot that can be done outside of what I'm naming as soon as you add that advocacy piece on as well.
Yeah, I don't even know how to jump in. Nicole, I think that was beautifully said, because I was like, oh my gosh, where do you, wait, you start here, no, you start here, no. It's so, I think one of the first things is like just that realization, like what you laid out of, we can't be anti-racist and transphobic or, you know, pro-LGBTQ and race, you know, like these are all intertwined. These are all byproducts, intentional byproducts of white supremacy. I mean, we have to name that. And us white folks, we got to get over ourselves and be so that we can talk about it, and so that other people can talk about it with us and around us. Because I see it, you know, in every organization I've ever worked with, no matter how progressive, these standards of white supremacy. And so we have to name that. It's all intertwined. But when I was trying to think of some concrete things too, of course we need data, because we need to know how it's impacting folks, but we need folks who are collecting that data to be trained on how to ask it, how to present it, if it's a forum, how to answer questions about it. We need advocacy, but we also need, as Nicole said, to step back, you know, give folks tools and then step back and make space for folks to be able to step in and advocate for themselves and their communities that they know best about. One thing that I really like for example, after this, I'm attending, I don't usually have this late in meetings, but once a quarter, I attend a community advisory group meeting for UC Health's integrated transgender program. So I think having things like community advisory groups that really reflect the population that you serve, especially while you're doing the work to get your staff to reflect the population that you serve. And until you meet that goal, having a compensated community advisory group that can really help highlight some areas that might not be highlighted for the organization already. And yeah, and you know, dialogues like this, going to trainings, like all of that, sharing. But it's, I guess my point is when the question was asked, I was like, oh my gosh, it's not, there's no fix that I could say, you know, it's, you know, what's that saying, you know, it's not the shark in the water, it is the water. We have cultural changes to make. And so even as we're doing the work within our own organization of One Colorado, it doesn't change the fact that we are operating, that we need funds coming in. That doesn't change. You know, it doesn't change the fact that we need to pay our staff so that they can have healthy, equitable lives. And so it's just, sometimes it's this balance, getting as close to your values as possible and also still surviving. And I think that that's not any different from other folks.
Thank you both. I know that was a tough question, so I appreciate everybody doing their best. And I also apologize for the dog right now. So, you know, especially Nicole, I know that you work in youth space. And so, and we saw those statistics on youth and the impact there. Are there resources that are designed specifically for youth who are transgender or non-binary, who are choosing to leave their families home for the sake of their own mental health? And, you know, are there efforts, if advocacy or statewide? Can we concentrate a little bit on trans youth specifically and ways to help them?
Yeah. Yeah. There needs to be more services. Maybe I'll just start by saying that like way more services. So in terms of like, if a young person leaves their home and they're a minor and they're leaving because of like mental health reasons, that's not, I mean, I haven't worked in child protective services. I've worked adjacent to it for years through Urban Peak. That's not grounds usually to take someone out of the home. So then what ends up happening is people are like left without a place to stay. They can access services at our shelter, but our shelter limit for minors is 21 days. So people can stay at our shelter for 21 days and they have to have a parent or guardian consent to stay there, which means we are then having to call parents or guardians legally. It's just like legally, that's the process we have to go through, is then call parents or guardians and be like, hey, this person's here. Do we have your consent to stay here? And if they say no, then we can, like, that's grounds for neglect and we can call CPS and file a report. But it is like this messy process, in case you can't tell already, just from my brief description, to like get somebody even just shelter. That's not even housing, that is just sheltered for 3 weeks. And it is a messy process. But I will say that during that time period, we really focus on family mediation. Any way that we can help like raise some awareness and advocacy and education for the family. And it really is this like active question of like, is there any way to help this family and this kiddo like reform a trusting relationship? And if that kid ultimately doesn't feel super safe and supported there, what other services can we connect them to bolster their mental health? Because there are like resources and services. I mean, the few that I know of, like Youth Scene, Rainbow Alley out Boulder, Joy is Resistance, some of those sort of places that are doing that mental health and like community building work for youth, getting youth plugged in other places to really bolster their mental health, while like realistically, there's not a lot of other options for them to like have a place to stay when they're leaving family. One of my biggest like soapboxes is that part of how we combat youth homelessness is like really building small, like strong collective care efforts in the way that we are showing up for each other. Because if someone is leaving their house for mental health reasons because their family doesn't support their gender identity or sexual orientation, but specifically in the situation, their gender identity, maybe their social or medical transition, and they're leaving their home for those reasons. If they don't have like friends and community members to fall back on for a place to stay, there really is not a lot of options, which I think is here where like my little like grassroots feisty self really shows up, and it's like community coalition building and like mutual aid is like the way that we care for these people, because as soon as you try to get systems to click into place, like legally you need parent or guardian consent, like legally that's what you need. And so it's really, really difficult. And I will say that then like outside of like what we're providing at Urban Peak, I mean, as soon as someone hits 18, of course they have the option for housing. Of course they have the option to stay at a shelter longer term. Referrals to places like some of the safe outdoor spaces, the tiny home villages, the Colorado Village Collaborative they're being really intentional about like how are we prioritizing applicants that are trans, like, which I personally am like a really big fan of, like that they're being intentional about prioritizing those applicants is like amazing, because they're working outside of this like coordinated entry housing system. They can prioritize people based on different aspects of identity that are more oppressed and vulnerable on the streets. And so that they're like, we are going to intentionally like prioritize people who are unhoused and trans who are applying for these spaces. Like that is amazing to me. And then we have like the Gathering Place and the Dolores Project, which are like for all ages, not just for young people, but as soon as someone's over 18, they can access services there. And both of those spaces are geared towards women and anyone who's trans or gender expansive in any way. So it's space that tends to feel a little bit safer and really affirming and celebratory of people's identities. So I don't know how much that was answering the question. I will say that then in terms of like policy, like I actually, that is not my wheelhouse as someone that's been pretty much in direct services. So maybe Marv has more to say on that. But I do think there's a lot to be said for like the foster care system. Trans youth are overrepresented in that, as you mentioned, I think in your opening data. So like, how are we addressing like really pushing for like family unification instead of removal from the home, so people are not just exiting out of the foster care system and not having a place to stay, as well as then like prioritizing affordable housing, because like while there is a lot of folks who are trans who like get kicked out or feel unsafe at home and run away, there are also just families who don't have good, like extreme amounts of poverty within families who then like cannot support their kids, who then end up unhoused. So like if we can help to protect families and give them affordable places to stay, there will be less homeless trans people. Like that is just the reality. And so prioritizing policies that like create affordable housing, protect affordable housing, and like revamping the foster care system as much as possible, as well as obviously like within school systems and like community groups for trans students to receive support, because there's a lot of bullying and discrimination that still happens in school settings. And then I know, I mean, I forget if this is like another question you'll ask. I also know we're short on time, but in terms of like Colorado being sort of like the state in a sea of other states that are passing so many discriminatory laws against trans kids, both socially and medically, right? I think, I mean, I've heard recently about sort of like a movement to create like a legal refuge status, like California drafted a Senate bill last month, that I know there's been at least some talk about intention of Colorado drafting something similar to basically be like a refuge state for folks, where families, if they're leaving a state because their kid can't get affirming healthcare, that like Colorado can be a space where they can come. But in order for those folks to come and land here and be okay, we need affordable housing, because right now with the landscape of Denver, people will move here and then not have an affordable place to stay. So part of how we prevent homelessness is literally just like the behind the scenes work of affordable housing, which is so much easier said than done. So that's what I have to say on some of that. And I will let Marv kind of speak to where there maybe was gaps on my end.
You know what? Actually, could we repeat the question? Because my wheels were spinning with like everything Nicole was saying. Like I was riding your wave, Nicole.
Yeah, no, this is great. And we really love that we're sort of doing some of these more like freewheeling conversations. And like, that's the point, right? The point is that like having the conversation is the most important thing. And sometimes conversations go a little sideways, and that's good. The question was about youth homelessness and sort of resources for those. So I think Nicole listed a bunch of great resources, but also like what we can do specifically to address youth homelessness.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much more to add, but while Nicole was talking, I did have like a thought. And I think this has come out a lot in the data that you shared, Alexis, and some stuff that Nicole has said. But lots of times we talk about that negative data that shows the negative side of not being affirmed, of being discriminated against. But when we flip it, it's actually really positive outcomes. And so to some of the points that Nicole made, while maybe we cannot do too much about a young person being in an affirming home, knowing the power and the affirmation that you can give even in a 5-minute interaction with someone and affirming their name and affirming their pronouns, that helps create resilience. That gives hope. And so even when we're talking with teachers and administrators, yeah, they might not have an affirming home. Don't lose hope. It sucks. I'm not going to say it doesn't really effing suck, but don't lose hope, because there's so much that you can give someone in affirming them in that moment. So continue to do that. This is another one of those really, really big questions. I think Nicole gave amazing resources. There's also resources around the state. I can't remember what all you listed, so I'll say like Colorado Springs has Inside Out Youth Services that covers, I think, more than El Paso County, maybe the surrounding counties. And there's some services down near Durango. I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but there are some services around the state in addition to the amazing Urban Peak here in Metro Denver. I think one thing we need to do is more training. And I say that knowing that the resources are so limited, and it's really hard to train staff, and it's really hard to pay them for training when it's hard to pay them to work the desk because the resources are so limited. But one thing that I've heard, both when I was working at Denver Human Services and when I was serving as a commissioner on Denver's LGBTQ Commission for folks experiencing homelessness in Denver, is that while the staff may be great, not a lot is done when other consumers and other guests say things. And it's not something we would ever advocate for that other person to be thrown out or made to feel like they shouldn't be there. But some more training around how can staff support making it a safe space for both the guests who might be experiencing the transphobia and homophobia or racism, or whatever it is, and for the person who is using that as a tool that they've learned, honestly. And so I see that a lot where it's like, yeah, the staff are great, but man, someone else says something to me and the staff are crickets, like they don't know what happened, and they know that what happened. They just don't have the tools to deal with it. And so I see a lot of that, and I think that's a lot of what keeps folks from going back to shelters. Around policy, we do a lot of work with policy at One Colorado. And when we think about policy, sometimes we think about the state level policy, like passing laws. But I think it's important to understand that a policy could be a paragraph that you and your organization adopt to say, this is our value. A policy could be, just adding something to a procedure, saying, this is how it's going to be followed. So there are policies that you can do internally, or policies that already exist that you can start coming through. Just this year, late last year to get ready for this year, our exec team at One Colorado sat down and redid our employee manual. And I don't know why none of us had never seen it before, but all of a sudden we're changing all the he/she's the they. And it seems so small, right? And it is. But that's a really small step you can take to get you going on like what's next? What else can we do to make this more inclusive?
Awesome. Thank you both. I really love how some of these questions you've both been like, it's a big question and there's no one solution and we can't change the world. And then you also have these concrete solutions that are small and that are doable and that you could do at your organization next week, right? And I think that's lovely. And I think that's what a lot of people who join us are looking for. I'm just gonna try to get to a few things in the Q&A. If y'all want to check out anything in the Q&A that you want to either write a response to or try to respond to orally, that would be great, because I want to respect folks who took the time to enter questions. The first one I wanted to ask was about the from Donna Mae Baucat. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. About getting numbers of people who are LGBTQ in Southwest Colorado. Is there a reliable data collection in our region, or just generally anything about sort of rural or outside of Denver metro data and or services insights that you have? Nicole, I know your organization's in Metro Denver, so you're like, I don't know. But if you ever had, maybe you have people who email you and you redirect them to someone else in a different region.
I know this is really random, but so in Denver, we utilize, I think most continuums of care have to utilize the point in time every year to get annual data around homelessness. And at least in Denver, that's where we're collecting some of our data around the number of trans folks that are experiencing homelessness. So I'd be curious about in that region, if your continuum of care is, if you're participating in the point in time, because there might be some data there, just as like a starting place. That's just a thought.
And I'll just quickly mention that I know our point in time counts haven't been as accurate. For anyone who doesn't know, the point in time count is 1 day a year. We do a count of everyone experiencing homelessness in the state, but in the main time of COVID, we haven't been able to get the baseline information in the same way that we had in previous years. So I know that that's really impacted some of the data gathering, specifically to people experiencing homelessness. But I also know that generally we sometimes have trouble with volunteers for our point in time count in rural areas. So if you're ever available on that one night in January to help, and you're in an area outside of Denver Metro, that would be great to help us out. And feel free to email me after this, because I can put you in touch with the people who put folks out to do the point in time count when that time comes. Thanks, Marv. Any other thoughts on that, Marv, especially since you're working in Pueblo now? And once again, apologies for that dog scratching.
The data is limited by county. I found another thing I'm going to drop in, but I didn't drop it in yet because it doesn't answer your question. I just thought it was neat. So I'll drop that in a minute with some more Colorado data from the Movement Advancement Project. But Healthy Kids Colorado will have the most regional data for LGBTQ folks, and it's going to be around youth. But it's helpful in that it's the most drilled down, I think, that we have, if I'm correct. And then the Movement Advancement Project, which Colorado scores really high on their index as far as what our legal equality is, but y'all also mentioned that, like, is it really impacting everyone, which it's not always. So we have work to do there, but it gives some information on in Colorado, 4.6 of adults are LGBTQ, and then it breaks that down. 5% in the workforce are LGBTQ, things like that. So maybe some other interesting stuff, but the county level data, or zip code, but I think it's county level data, Healthy Kids does some drilling down.
Awesome, thank you. Corinne Di Vittorio had a question about data collection and initial questions or conversation starters to seek for folks. So whether that's maybe like an intake that Nicole, that you would do, or if there's any sort of forms or written documents, like Marv, if maybe there's a document where you're like, these people do really well when they gather data, they're asking in the way that people are best able to respond to. If either of you have thoughts on sort of from a data perspective, how do we get people to answer those?
I do have a document that I've created because I answer this email a lot through, or this question a lot through email, but it's definitely not been approved to be public. But let me just go in there and I'll drop some pieces into the chat so that y'all can have it, because basically a few tips. What you want to do is remove as much bias as possible, both in the actual question, but also in the way people are perceiving it. And so what I mean by that is, when we list out race, for example, how many times do you see white at the top? Like, so often, way too often, especially if you're doing it alphabetically. And then if you list it alphabetically, then it's like, nothing's getting prioritized. And so even when you're listing out what is your sexual orientation. If you say asexual is on the list, it's going to come up first. You know, don't put things like heterosexual and straight first, and then gay, lesbian, and then bisexual, and then, you know, but really list it out in a way to try to remove we all have it. I have bias. You know, we all have it, and we're going to write things in the way that we have it. And then another big thing, so I'll drop this stuff in just a second so you'll have it, but another big thing is a lot of folks will ask the gender identity question and say, are you a man, a woman, a trans man, a trans woman? And I just want to pause and say, imagine being a transgender person and having to pick a person with a trans experience and having to pick trans man when you identify as a man, just so that you're counted. And so what I explain to folks is when you're asking that question, do you want to know their identity or do you want to know their experience? Do they have a lived experience of being trans or non-binary? So we actually start separating that question out into two. So at the minimum, are you, and I'm trying to do an alphabetical order since I said that, are you female, male, non-binary? Choose not to answer. That's like at a minimum, right? And then are you, second question, are you transgender? Do you identify as transgender? Are you transgender or non-binary? There are a bunch of different ways that, you know, we can kind of ask it. So I'll drop some of that in because it is really important how we ask it. One, to get the data that we need, and two, to make folks feel comfortable answering it. Not everyone will feel comfortable, and that is okay. We have a lot of work to do to get right data. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So we are at the end of our time. I want to respect everyone's time who chose to join us, and Marv having a whole other meeting after this one. So I am sorry to say that, you know, we're going to go ahead and end it here. For some of the other questions in the chat, for Cassandra, particularly about Spanish-speaking trans Latina women experiencing homelessness and any resources, we're going to try to research something and get back to you. And see if we can get you resources, because, you know, I think particularly our question about talking about needing to have identification and papers, like how much that is such an impact for services, and that's an impact on the community of people experiencing homelessness. It's a big impact on youth who don't necessarily have a beginning document, and it's certainly a big issue for our immigrant community and often our Latino community. And so that one in particular, I want to try to get to, and maybe we can email you after the fact. And I apologize to anyone else who submitted a question that we weren't able to get to. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We are going to have 4 more sessions this year in August, September, October, November. We're taking July off, and we're going to be taking December off. We're still figuring out what those sessions are. So please tell us what you thought of today. Tell us what you thought of any other sessions you've come to. There will be a survey in tomorrow's follow-up email that'll have the YouTube link to this. And go ahead and please tell us what you thought, what works, what doesn't, because we're still planning these and we want to really meet the community where they're at in terms of answering the questions and serving folks to educate issues around homelessness, whether that's about identity or last month's was on climate change. We're really trying to cover a lot of information. So save those dates if you can. And thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you back in August, and we really appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Thanks.